champion, welcome, Danny Batten.
Number one. You win.
Hey guys, welcome to episode number 13, unlucky for some, of the Danny Batten MMA show, only on Ace Podcast Nation. I am your host, Sai. Here at Ace Podcast Nation, we have shows, content, and interviews on all sorts of subjects, from football to mental health to mixed martial arts to boxing, films and TV, conspiracy theories, as well as our unique series, My Story. We dropped episode number 2 of that on this past Sunday with former Wales international and Cardiff City and Arsenal defender Rhys Weston. We also have every Monday a live football show, which is the Andy Campbell show. This past Monday, after this show's, because this show drops on a Wednesday, I actually had Scottish international Kevin McNaughton join me as Andy was away on assignment, let's say. He was unavailable, so Super Kev joined me for a chat, which was a lot of fun. And we got loads and loads of content coming your way with lots and lots of different guests and fighters and all sorts of stuff. Today's show is going to be a little bit different because we obviously haven't got any current content to talk, but we wanted to keep up the momentum as such. We've been progressively getting more and more downloads each week, so we wanted to keep going. We didn't want to take a break. So we decided, right, we'll have a look at some retro content. So each week we're going to review UFC shows from our past. We're starting with UFC 1 today. We're going to talk about that, which was very interesting as it's not what it is today in many ways. And we're also talking Frank Bruno versus Lennox Lewis from, I think it was 1993, the Battle of Britain. And it was definitely a super fight at the time. But before I introduce my co-host, who provides all the technical analysis, I'd just like to say today's show is brought to you by Away Day Apparel. Away Day Apparel is a group of casually obsessed football fans looking to bring something different to your wardrobes. You can visit their website, awaydayapparel.co.uk. I'll put the links in the description, and I highly recommend giving them a follow on social media, at Away Day Apparel on Twitter and at awayday_apparel on Instagram. They've got lots of new things coming this year. That's exciting stuff for the next few months for the brand. They've got limited edition bobble hats at the moment. I believe there's 40 of each kind. So they'll be the must-have thing, especially with the weather in Britain being so up and down as well with that. And especially for viewers and listeners of Ace Podcast Nation, if you use the code AA Podcast Nation, all in lowercase, you can get 10% off all orders. And that's AA Podcast Nation, all in lowercase, and you get 10% off all orders. So, with no further ado, my co-host, the man who breaks down all the fights for us and gives his technical know-how, former Cage Warriors featherweight champion, UK MMA legend, Mr. Danny Batten. How are you, my friend?
You know, I'm doing as good as anyone can do while they're trapped in their own home. It's weird, different. I'm so used to being busy and not having no time at home, which I complain about, and now I'm complaining about the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm in here too much. I want to get out.
That's it. Everyone's going stir crazy now. I tried to explain to my son today, like, the last 2 days have been a bit of a struggle for us, but then before that we were doing all right and it was all okay. And I just said, it's so unprecedented. No one really knows what to expect. No one knows how long it's going to last. You've just got to take each day as it comes. And, you're going to get days where some days are harder than others. It's just, unfortunately, the way it is and the situation we're in. but I don't think it's going away anytime soon, unfortunately.
No, I don't. I think it's here to stay for some time. I just don't hope it don't eat into how limited summers that we have here in the UK. So, yeah, when you say UK, I mean this is
typically
across the world. So,
yeah. Well, that's spot on. It's going on everywhere, and let's be fair. Typical of the British weather, in that as soon as you go on lockdown, it's blazing sunshine. We've had some lovely days. Typical, absolutely typical. That when you've got to stay in, the weather turns for the better. But there we go. So anyway, we're gonna try and switch off from the coronavirus and just maybe take people's minds off it, and we're gonna talk some combat sports. We're gonna start with Lennox Lewis versus Frank Bruno from 1993 at Cardiff Arms Park. Must have been one of the last fights at Cardiff Arms Park, because that was demolished not long after, and obviously the Millennium Stadium is there now.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It rolls back some of my childhood memories when I look at it and I see the Cardiff Arms Park Stadium. So yeah, what did you think of the fight overall?
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching it at the time. Looking it back now, it wasn't quite how I remembered it. I thought initially Frank Bruno was on the receiving end all the way through, but wasn't so as I started looking back. But of course, I'm looking at it now from a more educated point of view. I'm certainly no boxing specialist, but I know a lot more than I did when I was a kid watching it. And so yeah, I really enjoyed looking back at the fight overall. It was a good pace all the way through, very steady, I would say, but it wasn't one of those bore fests that you can get. So it's one of those ones that were, it was worthy of a good watch. You could certainly sit down and have a good old watch, and it'd be entertaining. What massive highlights in it, but nevertheless, there were a few little points of interest that happened throughout the match, not just in one round, but in several of the rounds. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. As you get, especially in heavyweight boxing fights, sometimes they can, they can become a bit of a snooze fest. But I thought this was, it wasn't electrifying by any means. It wasn't, what Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder's those last two fights were. But it was, it was interesting. I've got it sort of playing on my screen now, and they did obviously even going by the stats, the way they do their stats are completely different to what they do now. So the stat they used was average punches per round, the last two fights as an average. And actually, going off that, Frank Bruno had landed 24 punches per round, and Lennox Lewis 22. But Frank Bruno had thrown 61, whereas Frank on average, and Lennox Lewis had only thrown 47. So he was a lot more accurate, Lennox Lewis, according to the stats of the time. But I do wonder how accurate they are compared to, the stats you get now, where they roll off.
It's hard to know.
But, and they did things like average jabs and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to remember back from, because I obviously watch a lot of boxing back, being a kid and stuff. I'm just trying to remember back. I sort of remember when Lennox Lewis was coming up through the ranks, and I know he was someone that could sometimes have his lazy spells. And Frank Bruno was someone that is a little bit ploddy and can sometimes gas a little bit. I think that's the initial consensus I had. That I knew of when I was watching them, and sort of like this was sort of like my expectation watching it back again. But I was quite impressed overall with Frank Bruno. I thought that although he is very, very steady and almost ploddy like, he was actually coming forward constantly. If we start going through the rounds, if we can start doing that. Lennox started out really fast, and this has become a theme throughout the rounds. Actually, you got Lennox Lewis coming out, kind of taking it to Frank, but it would only be for like 20 seconds, no more than that, and then he would go back, into backpedaling mode. And very early on, Frank Bruno was working with body jabs a lot, so I could only surmise that he was obviously looking to go into deeper rounds and perhaps wanted to take the pace out of Lennox Lewis early. The first round was really hard round to score, like I say, because Lennox Lewis come out a little fast, and then Frank Bruno looked like he was more steady throughout, and he looked like he took the centre better. So, I think initially quite an even round. It's really not hard to know how they judge boxing bouts, being I'm not a boxing specialist, but when it really sways one way or another, it's quite clear. But that was quite a hard round to initially score. And I think they can still score, because in MMA now, we can't have an even round, can we? You've got to go 10-9 or 10-8 either way. But I think you can have even rounds still in the boxing, especially back then. And, if I was going to be pushed or shoved to give it to anyone, I would have given it to Frank, purely because he had the centre of the ring. But it looked very, very even overall. And as a notice of something I observed was that they wrapped Lennox Lewis up to keep him warm. I don't know if you noticed that in between rounds, that they put like a blanket over him. That's something I didn't remember, and something that made me a little surprised.
Well, I think it's obviously it was in the Cardiff Arms Park, and obviously, like the Millennium Stadium now, they've got a roof which slides across, whereas back then the Cardiff Arms Park is a very open stadium, and I would imagine it would have been quite blustery and quite cold in there as well, because they only had the fans on the pitch and around the ring. They didn't have them up in the higher parts of the stands, and I think it would have been quite cold in between rounds for the fighters, which is you don't see that very often. But I think you're right. The way you called the round, Lennox Lewis came out quite quick and sharp, and then I think Frank kind of found his feet a bit after the first couple of minutes, and just took the center of the ring. But obviously this is relatively early in Lennox Lewis's career. He's only about 4 years into his professional career at this point, and he doesn't look anywhere near as dominant as he did later in his career. But it was a massive fight for him, as a young man fighting someone of Frank Bruno's reputation and stature, experience as well. And also on the undercard of this, sorry mate to interrupt you.
No, go on. No, go on.
I noticed in the undercard of this fight, undercard of this fight, there was a very young Joe Calzaghe made his I don't know if it was his debut, but he fought a 4-round fight in one of the really, really early fights in the card, which I thought was nice little
being 4
historical
rounds.
Fact.
Quite possibly would have been his first fight, being only 4 rounds in duration.
Lennox Lewis though showed good footwork, I thought. Even though Frank was looking, once he settled, he was being, he was sort of going in. Lennox Lewis was the quicker on his feet, I thought.
I absolutely agree with that. Definitely, in terms of style, because styles, you can make a lot of difference to the way the fighter wants to perform and so on and so forth, both offensively and defensively. And one thing Frank what we say, he's a plodder. I think it makes him look like a plodder because he's not like a pretty footwork guy, but he has really good balance though.
He's quite very, short and stocky, isn't he?
Yeah, he's got really sure-footed type of movement, but that also means you're kind of limited with your attacks. It's hard to be surprising with your attacks. You're not going to be able to float in and float out so much. You kind of like just got to dig through your shots a little bit. And the thing that always makes him look stylistically always the same in every fight is that because he doesn't have this floating footwork, he's not going to go in with like huge flurries like you quite often will see. So someone with really nice footwork, they'll hit a lot of single shots and then so like the jab and move around and stay out, and then when they've got the energy and the time is right to do so, they'll come in and exert a little flurry and then get back out. Whereas Frank sort of like just have to chip and plod. He's always doing either jab, double jab, triple jab, double jab cross. It's all very simplistic stuff because he's quite a well-built man, and not someone who looks super fast or does lots of flurries. Never looked pretty doing flurries. So I think that was a defining difference. Definitely both very stylistically different. Frank Bruno was coming in with a very high guard, and you had Lennox Lewis with a lower guard. So, Lennox Lewis was relying on his defence and his attacks being footwork orientated, and Frank Bruno was relying on his defence being his gloves up by his head, and sort of crashing through anything that Lennox had to offer. But in this second round, I really felt like Frank Bruno was beginning to take centre up. He's warming up his timing, and was catching Lennox. Lennox looked a little off balance. What we say about his footwork, I think sometimes he used to almost trip himself up a little bit. There was a couple of times when his balance looked a little off. He's missing Frank Bruno's timing. I think maybe because Frank Bruno's not super sharp. I think his timing must be a little bit awkward, because the shots that Frank Bruno were throwing were not particularly surprisingly lightning quick, but they seemed to be landing quite often on Lennox. And this kind of surprised me throughout the second round. Like I say, I thought initially when I was going to look back at this that I was going to be seeing Frank Bruno on the receiving end predominantly, because I just remember the last part of the fight. But I was really impressed with Frank Bruno. His work ethic was definitely there. He was, digging down, doing a constant work rate, really working his jab well to the body and to the head, and coming in with really good double jab and cross punch as well, which looked like it was gaining the respect of Lennox Lewis. And I would have given Frank Bruno that second round.
Yeah, I think he definitely took that second round. And funnily enough, I straight away in that the start of the second round, Frank Bruno catches Lennox Lewis with two jabs, straight flush in the nose.
Yeah.
And that seems to, it doesn't rock him in any way, but I think it did shock him, because just after that, his feet are a bit, not in his legs are wobbly or anything like that, but just he stumbled a little, just sort of tripped over his foot a little bit, and didn't look as light on his feet as he had in that first round. As he was the first round, he was kind of dancing around a bit around the outside of the ring, whereas this second round he looks a little less sure of himself. And he even ties up Frank Bruno into a clinch towards the end of the round. But obviously Frank is a big boy, and if he hits you with a couple of punches, you've got to respect that. And I think he definitely gained the respect of Lennox Lewis in the second round. If Lennox Lewis thought after the first round that it was going to be, or even before the fight, that he was going to come in and dispose of Frank easily, then by the end of the second round he knew that wasn't the case. I think Lennox was a little surprised. I think it was more awkward for him than he was perhaps going to anticipate. But like you said, he was in the early stages really of his development still. I think Lennox Lewis improved and definitely proved himself to be the best in the world as time went on. But I think at this point, we're probably seeing Frank Bruno at his best. I think it's one of the best I've ever seen him look. And we're probably seeing Lennox Lewis not quite look his best, because we know he's performed so much better and fought more dangerous opponents after this fight. But this third round, just saw more of Frank Bruno having success really, and then he wobbles Lennox Lewis. And I know in the interviews that when I was making a little research about this, Lennox Lewis was stating how that he wasn't hurt, it was more of a stumble, but he looked a little rocked. But one thing that Lennox Lewis does do, he rides out punches really well. So he has this lower guard. He relies on footwork, but he seems to have movement in his head when he does get tagged. He's not one of these people who are stiff and rigid. Frank Bruno is the opposite on that. He's very stiff, very rigid, and when he gets hurt, it's quite visually that he sort of stiffens up and he looks rocked. Lennox Lewis really rode them out really well. He sort of danced out that little hiccup that he had in this third round. I just saw more of Frank Bruno taking centre. He looked like he's just mildly outworking Lennox Lewis and just looked more the positive fighter. And I gave Frank Bruno that third round as well. Yeah, I think so. By this third round, Frank Bruno's thrown a lot more punches than Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis is still, as we said in the pre-fight stats, he's more accurate. But Frank Bruno in the second round, he threw 96 punches. to Lennox Lewis's 70 odd, and there's the same, very similar stats in the third round. And I think Lennox Lewis is the thing which helps him is one, he can take a punch, but also he's always moving. So, like you said, where he gets hit, his head's moving, but he's always on the move. He never seems to be stood in front of Frank Bruno for Frank Bruno to really hit him with a couple of shots. Lennox Lewis started that third round a bit better. He hit Frank Bruno with a couple of nice shots. I think it was a left overhand that got through. But Frank, like you said, technically was controlling the ring and controlling the space. He was making Lennox Lewis go where he wanted him to go.
I'd very much agree with that. I just wish that if for Frank to have had more success when he appeared to have rocked Lennox Lewis, when he got him backed up, he got success with the double jab right cross, all long punches. I mean, they're really outstretched when they landed. I think it would have been better if he carried on flurrying with the straight punches, but he didn't. He went straight in with an overhook, and sort of crowded his own work and got himself tied up, which was a shame because he just missed the moment a little bit there. I think he should have kept everything long.
Well, I just where it's playing now in the background, I just got to the bit where he rocked Lennox Lewis, and straight after he rocks him and he sort of snaps his head back a bit, he goes in and Lennox Lewis tries to pull him in for the clinch, and he's unsuccessful in clinching up, and Frank nails him with an uppercut in the clinch, and that nail, that lands quite flush with about a minute and a half to go in the round. And I do feel, looking at it now, as if with this minute and a half to go, Lennox Lewis does not look comfortable. And if Frank could have really poured on the pressure, like you see for fighters doing, 2020, where when they smell blood in boxing or MMA, they really go in for the kill. Sometimes to their detriment, and they gas out, or they get caught themselves. But you feel like if he had really pushed, because he's got Lennox Lewis in the corner now with a minute to go, and Lennox Lewis does not look at all comfortable. He's got him right up in the corner, and if he could, really, really get into it, I feel like he could have maybe, won the fight before. Early on, because obviously,
Frank just unfortunately he doesn't have that sort of flurry style. He doesn't have that I've injured someone and that absolute killing instinct. He's clearly a big hitting man, but I think he does a lot of his damage with the one that he connects with, and I think to try and chase it up, he doesn't have the best awareness to make combinations land once he's already done damage. Like I say, I felt like he crowded his own work a little bit. But nevertheless, it was a good round, and it was another round that went in favour of Frank, in my opinion. It was all about whether he could maintain form, because I think this high guard was working well. I think the fact that he was doing body jabs as well as doubling up and even tripling up jabs up to the head to try to stop Lennox Lewis being counter orientated. I think he was doing initially really, really well. So certainly, I think initially getting ahead in the fight.
It's funny you should mention about the Lennox Lewis countering, because just with about 40 seconds to go, Frank Bruno did push forward a little bit, and Lennox Lewis leant back and hit a big wide right hook. And they went kind of over the top of Frank Bruno's high guard, and he caught him sort of on the side of the face, and that snapped back Frank Bruno's head. And he then, for the rest of that 45 seconds that was left in that round, he backed off then. So I think Lennox Lewis, obviously, it was almost like a warning that maybe, don't think that because you've, caught me with a couple of good jabs that this is it, because he did. But just watching the replay now, Frank Bruno really did, he definitely rocked him. I know Lennox Lewis has said since that he didn't, but 100% he did. Because you can just see in the way he reacts to it.
I don't think it was hugely,
no, it wasn't huge, he was wobbling, but
it was certainly something to have been built upon for that moment. But I felt like, Frank Bruno kind of let that chance slip away a little bit, and allowed him to get back in get back in the round and back in the fight.
Yeah, I agree with that. What about what did you make of round 4?
Yeah, round 4, we saw Lennox Lewis come out quite fast. This is where I think he started to notice that it was a good thing to go at Frank Bruno rather than let Frank Bruno come forward to him. So he started coming out with really fast jabs, getting the jab crosses going. Started getting successes with his jab as well. I felt like Frank Bruno was initially getting the better of the jab game, but we started seeing Frank get jabbed up a little bit. You started noticing, I think it was his left eyelid, isn't it? Yep, it'd be less. His left eyelid started showing signs that it was beginning to swell. So some of these shots were getting through. This round really become a jab war for the first portion of the round. They was both really trying to see who could get the established jab going, and you really contrasting difference. You still got Frank Bruno plodding with his jab, really trying to set up just the timing for it to be at the end of his shot. And then you've got Lennox Lewis, who has that footwork orientated, trying to stamp in with his lead foot. He literally was stamping his lead foot as he tried to push it through even deeper. I'm not too sure what the boxing term and technicality behind him coming in the way he was with that jab, but that was just a defining difference. He's really stamping that foot. But like I say, I felt like Lennox perhaps started to realise that when he presses forward, this is where he's going to get some successes. He was still on the outer fringes of the ring, still very much Frank doing what he had done in the previous rounds. I just felt like maybe his work rate wasn't quite up to what it had been in the previous rounds. We might have seen the first stages of him just plateauing a little bit with his work rate, but nothing where I thought, oh, Frank's really fading out big here. Still had really high guard, still had his wits about him. It just looked like Lennox was coming back a little bit more, and Frank was perhaps doing a little bit less back. And Lennox certainly was backpedaling a little less. So I think this was when things were beginning to switch up a little bit, and Lennox was going to begin to start looking like he could be more dangerous, because up until then it was all really eyes on what Frank was doing. But I think we saw inklings of what was going to be coming in later rounds in this round. I think this was quite an even round. I wouldn't like to give it either way. I would say it was an even round.
I think I probably would have just given it to Lennox Lewis. I just think this was, I agree with you, that maybe the first signs that Frank was getting a bit tired. But also, I think more than that, I think it was more Lennox Lewis upped his output, he upped his work rate. His feet were moving quicker, and we said he had been quite light on his feet, but he was quick around the ring. He was moving from corner to corner. So even when Frank was backing him up a bit, he was moving. So Frank was having to chase him down, and then as soon as Frank was in position, Lennox Lewis would hit him with a couple of jabs, or a bit later in the round, he was hitting him with some overhands, and Frank was still trying to do that same plodding game plan that he displayed in the first 3 rounds, but Lennox Lewis had changed his game plan, or at least made it more aggressive. Yeah,
absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. One of my criticisms, if any, about Lennox Lewis was that sometimes he relaxes off the gas when it doesn't look visually like he had to. He just sometimes gets a little bit, I suppose, lazy. I don't know whether you want to say that, a little bit complacent, maybe. Maybe disguises how tired he really is, but sometimes he just seems to wait a lot, and I don't know, he just looks so good when he comes forward, yet he does it not very often.
Sorry to interrupt you, mate. Sorry, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, mate. That's interesting. They just flashed up. The one I'm watching is off HBO, so it's the American. They just flashed up. It said Lederman's scorecard, so I'm not sure if that's one of the judges or if that's I would have thought it's one of the pundits, and he's given every single round to Frank Bruno 10-9.
Right. Okay.
Which I found quite interesting, because I think we gave the first 3 to Bruno, or maybe did we give one to
first round
to Lennox?
Yeah, it's really hard, the first one. I personally
Bruno,
put even. I found it hard to judge, and then I put Frank again, taking the middle rounds,
2 and 3.
Then Lennox Lewis round 4. I sort of like got Lennox taking the last rounds, but look, we're not boxing proper specialists, and for say that Frank run every round, I could see that they would give it to him because he was taking centre more. And I think he was slightly throwing more.
Yeah, Frank Bruno's his left eye looks really quite swollen. Going into the round 5, he's starting to close up, and which shows that, like you said, Lennox Lewis's jabs were getting through.
They were getting
maybe
through.
That overhand right as well.
Yeah, maybe so. But initially, this fifth round though, Frank Bruno, where you would normally see him fade, but he still looked good. He's come out looking sharp. He's come
Hands
out
are nice and high.
Yeah. He still had a really nice high guard. Makes him look safe from the potential really dangerous Lennox Lewis. You had Lennox Lewis complain as well about some cuffs around the back of the head. I don't think Frank Bruno's intentionally a dirty fighter.
No.
But some of them were cuffing around the back of the head a little bit. The fact that Lennox Lewis was complaining goes to show he was a little bit frustrated in there, and he knew he wasn't getting it all his own way. So that was an interesting thing, to see Lennox Lewis complain like that. As the round started going, though, you started seeing this double jab cross punch by Lennox Lewis, almost to a point where he's off balance trying to reach with that overhand right. I know he's had successes in fights before with his overhand right. So maybe he's put a little bit of hopes on it, but it was making him look aggressive, and it was making Frank Bruno either have to stay and meet hard, which would take more of his gas tank, or accept the attacks a little bit. I think this is a really good game plan, if it was the game plan for Lennox Lewis, to keep meeting him like he did in round 4.
Frank hit him with the 2 lovely right hooks.
Yes, he did.
With about 1 minute 40 to go, just after Lennox Lewis hit that combination, which you said, sorry, I forgot what you said now. Jab with the overhand right.
Yeah, that's right. He come back at him.
Just after that, he hit him 2 big right hooks, and straight away Lennox Lewis complained again about the shots to the back of the head.
Sure.
But one thing I'd say is Lennox Lewis does not look tired in any way. He looks
no. Yeah, he looks the same.
Fighting fit, like he could go another 12 rounds. He could keep going. Whereas Frank is sweating a lot. His eyes closed. He's starting to show the wear and tear of the fight. Whereas on the scorecards, he's probably he is up.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, isn't it? How a scorecard is saying one way, but the damage and the fatigue is showing another.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I was still really impressed. Like I say, I'd forgotten a lot of what the fight was all about. I just remember the end of it predominantly. But I was really impressed with Frank Bruno, because Lennox Lewis was really trying to establish before the halfway point that he was going to be on the comeback trail and start taking back these rounds. But Frank was really meeting him and started changing up his punching angles. He started looking for double body hooks. He had that bit of success, like what you said as well. Then he started catching Lennox with jabs again. And I was really impressed with it. Just now approaching 1 minute left in the bout. I initially thought that this was really impressive from Frank, especially from fights that I know he'd had before, where sometimes he would his work rate would really plateau out by the halfway mark. It still looked like he was well in it. He still felt that he had the belief that he could win, and it was making for a really good round. I think this was one of the more interesting rounds because they both had successes. But Lennox Lewis, about 30 seconds from the end, gets success with a double jab cross again. Frank Bruno comes straight back with shots of his own and gets successes. I think this was a really close round, really hard to score. A push comes to shove, I did put on here, I'd give it to Lennox. I just think he was perhaps a little bit more successful with his successes than Frank Bruno was. But as an observation of how I remembered Frank Bruno as a fighter, I was quite impressed that we're coming up to the halfway mark and he was switching up to the body hooks, and it goes to show you still got his mind about him and trying to bring new things to the table as the fight progressed.
Yeah, he was varying it up nicely. That was I think that was probably the best round of the fight in terms of
it was good.
Both fighters really started to go for it a bit. It's interesting when you watch the replays. you can really see how much his eyes closed, because his other eye, his right eye looks as if it's wide open, but I don't think it is. It's just because the other eye's really closed.
That's right.
So what? I thought they were stopping it. They were just wiping away the Vaseline off Lennox Lewis's
there's
face.
too much. Yeah, there's too much on there.
So round 6 comes in. Lennox Lewis does not look remotely fatigued in any way. He looks like he's just started out, which you'd expect from the younger fighter. Should be a bit fitter. But Frank Bruno is still, his guard is really high. He does look a bit more. What's the word? He looked a bit shakier in defence there in the early few 30 seconds. Lennox Lewis threw a couple of punches and he just looked a bit off balance, Frank. But it's interesting straight away.
Yeah, they come out. I mean, they were really jabbing again. It was another round of it's almost like they put all the other shots to the side. Yeah, they were both really, not just throwing singles, there was doubles and triples, and I think even at one stage there was like 4 jabs coming out at once, so as a combination almost like. It's like they both of them really wanted the establishment of a superior jab on each other, and I don't think anyone really dominated over anyone else with that jab. And this is why you were seeing, the crosshand coming over the top, looking to try to throw something in the mix. But they was both really fighting for range with this jab. It made interesting viewing because, to see heavyweights put together so many jabs, in triples and even quadruples, that was really quite unusual. But for the first time, you see odd times with Frank was starting to drop his lead hand. He would have a double high guard, and if you have a look, what time are we in on this round? I think we're only coming up at just a minute in. That left hand's just beginning to go wayward. He's just struggling to hold it up, and he's got really muscular set shoulders and upper arms. So he was getting a bit of lactic acid involved there, and he was footworking back a lot more than he had done in any of the other rounds. In fact, this is the first round where he's going back more than Lennox was. He was still getting successes. He was trying to do some inward boxing, holding Lennox's head. I don't think it's allowed, but he was holding his head and punching up and hooks. So he was definitely fit, but nevertheless, those big muscles need energy, and I think he was getting his first real big deficit dump in those big arms of his. What I see now is the different in engines of energy level here. Although I think Frank Bruno dug deep to throw equal amount of shots to Lennox, maybe even more. It looked like it took more out of him to throw those shots than it was for Lennox. It looks like Lennox is still coasting the rounds, holding something back.
The thing I noticed as well off the stats is Frank Bruno's throwing a lot more, but Lennox Lewis is hitting. He's hitting his target a lot more. I think the other thing is you can see Lennox Lewis now is starting to load up that overhand right, or that right hook. So whether that's just because he's gaining in confidence, or he's noticing that Frank Bruno's his left hand is dropping a bit, because like in the first 5 rounds, Lennox Lewis's Frank Bruno's left hand is almost up here.
Yeah, that's right. He had it very high.
So by the end of round 6, it's down here.
Just started to go wayward,
and that's Lennox Lewis is obviously his big shot is that sort of right hook,
overhand,
or the overhand right.
That's right. Yeah. And I think he was measuring it up a little bit for some successes in the round. But this start of round 7 saw Frank Bruno really coming out, and I think he just overrun himself here. This is why I was really impressed. I think this is why we've probably seen him at his best physically, because he was still fit. Although he was getting a bit fatigued in those big muscles, he still had quite good form, and he was definitely fit, because he really took it to Lennox. And I think this was to try to say to Lennox Lewis, hey, look, we're at the halfway point, just past, but I'm still ready to go the whole amount of rounds at a good pace. But he crowded his work again. If you have a look, he got some successes, and with the doubling and tripling up the jabs. Then he went with uppercuts and hooks, and I just think with those big heavy muscles of his, he's never going to be fast with those hooks and never going to be super powerful. And but Lennox Lewis is so devastating with his uppercuts. I think his uppercuts are some of the best that we've ever seen in heavyweight boxing. And he's just started nailing Frank Bruno, and it started looking horrid for him. He was literally measuring with one hand and then throwing the uppercut. Yeah, it was horrible. And I actually thought when the ref stepped in, I thought the fight was going to get stopped there and then. But they let it continue on. But it was a handful of shots, a little more than. And Frank was pretty much out on his feet. I mean, fair play to Frank to not fall over onto the canvas. He goes to show his experience to lock out his legs and hold himself up on the ropes. But yeah, it was a good stoppage by the referee.
Yeah, and Lennox Lewis smelt blood. As soon as he felt Frank going, as soon as he felt the guard drop, he was in.
Yeah, it's like he has more gears in his game. He has that footwork that can make you really dangerous. Because he can float in and float out. It just looks like he's just got different speed gear ratios, whereas Frank Bruno just doesn't have that. And when he did try to do it, that was the final undoing of him. Really, he really tried to pour it on, and do what was kind of needed of him to establish dominance, but he just doesn't have that style. He tried to open up, and it left his defense to be countered. And when he got countered, the gear change in Lennox was clearly seen. He stepped it up, and he didn't stop until that round was done. And it happened all too early in the round for Frank to be able to get to the finish line of that round and see through. It would have perhaps been good to see Frank, carry on doing what he was doing and having successes with, and maybe put energy in with those flurries, knowing that, hey, okay, look, I'm 40 seconds out from the end of a round, right? I'm going to go at him now, and let's see if I can put a statement down on the round and on the fight. And if he was to get rocked like he did, he could at least get to the finish line. I think even referees, knowing that it's approaching the end of a round, might let a fight go on a little longer because they know the end of the round's just about to ensue. But the fact that this was so early on really give Frank no chance to get through the round against someone like Lennox Lewis.
Yeah, especially because he was measuring those shots so clearly. He was basically holding him where he wanted, and just unleashing it. So
yeah,
I don't think there was any way they could have let it keep going. Really,
no. As tall and as rangy as Lennox Lewis is, I think some of his best work is his hooks and uppercuts. I think it's in close range. It's obviously great outward, don't get me wrong, but he had a much superior inward boxing game than Frank Bruno, and it showed. I mean, those uppercuts are utterly disgusting. They looked horrible.
Nasty.
Would take a normal man's head clean off. Really good performance, and we see Lennox Lewis go on and develop as a fighter and really become a dominant force. I would have loved to have seen Lennox Lewis have fought Tyson when Tyson was actually at his peak. I'm
sure we'll cover that fight, the Lewis Tyson fight.
Yeah, I just wish it happened a few years earlier than it did. But yeah, I mean, Lennox Lewis is truly one of the greats. And Frank Bruno was one of the fighters that we all had in our hearts. I remember, my mum and dad would always watch these fights, and we'd sit down together and always watch them. And my mum loved Frank Bruno, so naturally, so did the son. So I always loved him, and I remember really rooting for him in this fight.
Lennox Lewis is one of the greatest British boxers of all time, and this is early in his career. And I think that's why I found it very interesting to watch. Much like you, I thought Lennox Lewis had destroyed Frank Bruno. And it's only when you watch it back that actually Frank Bruno was ahead on the card. He was doing well.
Yeah.
But he just maybe, whether he tired or whether Lennox Lewis just became a more aggressive. But it's interesting to watch this learning curve for Lennox Lewis because he beat Frank Bruno in the end. The way he finished him was quite comprehensive. But he would have learned a lot from this fight, and his team would have learned a lot from this fight, especially those early rounds.
I think as he started fighting, these high ranked fighters and beating them, it gave him an aura of confidence. And I think a confidence Lennox Lewis is a really dangerous opponent. I think we saw, him I wouldn't even say have doubts, but not know what he's up against truly when he was in there with Frank. He was still giving him respect. I think Lennox is at his best when he has no respect for that fighter, when he knows he's the superior guy. I think going into this fight, he was still learning, where he was in the rankings. I think Frank Bruno was actually ranked like number 5 as all-time heavyweight at the time. So not quite. Obviously, deserved his right to be in there with Lennox Lewis, but I know there's always been an issue, isn't there, with boxing, of them holding different belts and different things. But I mean, Lennox Lewis went on to shine brighter and brighter after this bout, and I just think this was. I think he started to really make roads of improvement thereafter this experience in there with Frank Bruno.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. Okay, so we'll cover another fight next week, and we'll also discuss UFC 2 next week. We're going to talk UFC 1 now. We're not going to go through it round by round and fight by fight. We're just going to we'll go discuss each fight, but without, really going into the amount of detail that we would normally. But first of all, I wanted to just say this is UFC 1 is a real early concoction of what the UFC is now. The tagline was "There are no rules." They, in fact, with very limited rules, but there was no biting or eye gouging, but you were allowed to pull hair, headbutt, groin strikes, and fish hooking. This obviously changed as the years went on, but in this first tournament, it's also a tournament format. So instead of like a card of fights, it's a knockout tournament from start to finish, with the final being the final 2 fighters. There's no weight limits, so you can have super heavyweights versus flyweights or whatever it may be. Which, obviously again changed as the years went on, but this was a very interesting spectacle.
Yeah. I mean, this was back when it was really martial art versus martial art, and we really don't get that anymore. Of course, you're going to have fighters like Damian Maia specialize in the ground arts more than any other area, so it's kind of predictable where he wants to take the fight, and you could say that about Adesanya for his striking. You know where he predominantly wants it, and it's about trying to keep it there. But fighters today are well versed in every area. You can even see a British fighter now that hasn't got a pedigree in wrestling managed to stay on the feet against a way superior wrestler in terms of credentials. But the sport of MMA has evolved, and you can now anti-wrestle, and just because you're a superior wrestler doesn't mean you're going to get the fight to the ground anymore. The sport's developed of its own right. But you can't help but have a love for the way it was. A kung fu guy against a karate, and a sumo guy, versus a kickboxer. What would happen? Wow. It was full of wonderful questions that no one knew the answers to, truly.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at the Royce Gracie fights, he barely, I don't think he threw a punch in the 2 or 3 fights he has in this tournament. He barely threw a punch. Even when he was on the ground, and he would have mount, no punches thrown, a couple of kicks. The kicks were very similar to what John Jones does now, where it's down and forward onto the kind of knee joint to set up for the for the takedown. There was also no doping probes at this time. There was no judge score. There was no time limits. The only way you could win was by your corner throwing in the towel, knockout, or tap out. The first bout we saw, which was so interesting to me, I haven't watched it for a long time, and it was Gerard Gordeau, who is a Savat fighter, versus Telia Tuli, who is a sumo wrestler, who is also stars in Hawaii 5-0 and the Magnum PI and a couple of other TV shows now. So like, some people would have been, if some people watched this along with us and they weren't familiar with it, they may have looked at it and gone, "Oh my god, it's him from the TV." But he was a proper sumo wrestler. He was not like a freak show type of thing where they brought a celebrity in. But he got knocked the F out very quickly.
I mean, it's the first ever fight in UFC, and what a fight! I mean, I think the commentator said, "Was that the teeth shot out over towards where they were?" I mean, it don't get any more dramatic than it was, and I think that just set the precedent of how some of these matches were potentially going to go. I mean, I think it's all about, back then, not having established ideas about how fighting was really going to go, knowing that you're going to be doing knockout rounds and have all those fights in one day. You want to be getting people out of there as quick as you possibly can, and you really saw that throughout the theme of the early shows. People were getting victories very, very early on, and well, this was the first ever one, and it really didn't last long at all. The sumo wrestler, I mean, he's in a totally different environment. When you're fighting sumo and they're fighting each other, they lock horns somewhat, don't they? And they're pushing weight into weight. Whereas the Savat guy, totally opposite stylist, doesn't want to get into any kind of confrontation other than striking confrontation. And the Savat guy did exactly what he should do, which is circle off center. He got driven back, and he backed away. I call it like a repelling magnet. He repelled away. He didn't want to obviously meet forces with a guy so much heavier than himself.
No.
Footworked away. The big guy, being a big heavy lump, steaming forward like a sumo wrestler only knows how to do. Steamed forward so far, he ran himself off balance, didn't he? Fell against the cage.
Got cracked.
Yeah, being a big lump of a guy, couldn't get back to his feet very quickly at all. Kind of looked like a tortoise trying to get back on his feet with no assistance, and got a kick to the face, an absolute brutal kick to the face. I mean, this Savat guy is like 6'6", and he's a big guy. And I don't know what people know about Savat, but Savat is actually a very skillful art.
I was going to ask you actually.
Yeah, where they kick with the
explain what it is.
Nearly all full contact fighters know that the only part of your foot you really want to kick with it is the under part of the foot with the heel, the side blade of the foot with the side kick, and when you do teeps, you do it with the under tray of the toes. They could do their turning kicks. Where we would normally do, say, like a roundhouse kick, we normally always land with our shins, but Savats don't. They bend back the toes and they'll kick with the foot all the time, just the foot. So they have super precision. They're really quite athletic and acrobatic in their approach as well. It's a real devastating striking system. Some of the best strikers in the world will come from the Savat background. I think it's a bit of a dying art now. You don't hear much about it, but if you're coming up against a proficient Savat guy, well, give them some respect, because they're brutal martial artists. They really are, and it was kind of demonstrated very, very briefly there. But that was one kick. Good night. It was all over.
The thing is, like that Telia Tuli, his only way as a sumo wrestler, his only way to win was going to be getting on top and beating them into submission from like a ground and pound, where they literally can't get him off because he's so big. Whereas, some of the other guys had a bit more about him. So he had to go forward to get, he wasn't going to sit behind his jab or anything like that. But, I know that they didn't have that technique at this time. But what I mean is, like, the only way he was winning was to get on top and use his weight.
Yeah,
and
you think so.
Got caught by a brutal kick. It was weird, though, because they stopped it as if they were stopping it to let him get cleaned up, and then they were going to start again. I think that's where they weren't quite familiar, maybe, with what
I think even the referees were unsure of what to do in the whole this game. It's not like the referees now are so ultra qualified. I see backstage with Bellator, and I've lucky enough to call it a couple of times in UFC as well. The referees come to each fighter before they go out, give them a rundown on are there any questions. They really know every single detail of what to do in every conceivable circumstance. You can see there that he really didn't know what to do. Do they stop to check the cut and let it resume, or they didn't know what?
It was almost like the sumo guy was so shocked to have lost his teeth that he thought that he could check and then he'd be allowed to continue, sort of thing. The next fight was, or the fight to see who would face Gordeau in the next round was Kevin Rosier, who was a kickboxer, versus Zane Frazier, who was a American
karate
Kenpo.
guy.
Kenpo. So that's karate?
It's basically kickboxing. It's you're given a karate term, but it's really a kickboxing system. To be honest, it's not karate as people know karate today.
So Kevin Rosier won via referee stoppage. Corner stoppage. This one, the corner threw the towel in. What did you make of this fight?
It was entertaining. The footwork of Kevin was just terrible coming forward, but he's a big lump of a guy. Managed to back Zane up and get him to the ground briefly. You could tell they both didn't know what they was doing on the ground. You had Kevin, try to hammer fist and do very inaccurate ground and pound. They scrambled back to the feet again. You see a bit of a groin strike from Zane. I think it knee to the old private parts. And that saw Kevin with his back against the fence and Zane looking more athletic. It looked like he was in better shape than Kevin was. And Kevin started being on the receiving end. Looking at this fight, you'd be thinking that he's not far from being out, but he toughed it out. He took the knees, took the inward boxing. So there was clinch and boxing and uppercuts going on. But then Zane looked like he was running a puff a little bit, and instead Kevin started coming back, and it was so entertaining.
Yeah, it was really good.
You got to always remind yourself these people are not proficient in the term of MMA. It was not MMA. It's called mixed martial arts, not because they were mixed in their skill set. It was mixed martial art because it is martial art versus martial art, and they had to improvise. They had to improvise that it weren't a ring. They had to improvise the fact that it was in a cage. Having your back up against the cage is vastly different from ropes. Some of these guys would have fought only ever on an open mat. Being karate and taekwondo, they wouldn't experience a cage or a ring. So it was interesting to see them improvise on the spot. But it was looking like it was going all Zane's way. And Zane got it to the ground a little bit with Kevin down in a turtle position. And it looked like it was curtains for him. But he broke out from that. When they both stood up, Zane looked absolutely done. His hands were down by his side. And then we had Kevin Rosier started come forward, gaining more confidence. And it wasn't long before Zane literally collapsed, I think more from exhaustion. But in true old school MMA, as it was back then, fashion, you saw that good old head stomp coming in. Because, of course, soft kicks and that are allowed. It was another grounded kick that ended the bout in the form of a head stomp. It looked absolutely brutal.
Oh, it did indeed. And like a lot of these guys, like when it came to outside of their martial art, so if some of them went to the ground or into grappling, they did not have a clue what to do. But that was what made it so interesting.
Yeah,
it's almost like I don't want to say the freak show because that's almost disrespectful, but like it's the aspect of it, of the just martial art versus martial art and no weight divisions, and it just it makes for some very entertaining viewing. And next up,
sorry, just to finish off on that as well. Did you see the interview as well with that Kevin afterwards? Did you see
I'm not sure I did. I probably did. Yeah.
No. Okay, it's really interesting. They're saying, how did you find it in there? He goes, it's really great. I'm just here to entertain. He was saying how that there have been many shows that he had, agreed to do, but none of them, obviously, they got blocked in some form or fashion. You can only but guess, but they never went ahead. And he only had 3 weeks to prepare. He lost 45 pounds in weight, just 3 weeks to prepare. So no wonder why you're seeing people in there absolutely gassed out. I mean, it seems like they scraped together this card with not a lot of time for people to prepare. But one thing I think you would guarantee is that Hoist knew when this was going to happen, that it was going to happen. I'm sure he had a proper fight camp in preparation. But he said, look, I'm in here for the love of it. I'm doing it. This is entertainment. And if I could get in there and do it again, I would. I mean, that's just fantastic.
Great attitude.
Yeah, it's just interesting.
Next up was the legend, the god, Royce Gracie, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus
Yeah.
Art Jimison, boxing. I believe he was I forget off the top of my head now. I think he was like a flyweight champion or a featherweight champion. He was a boxing champion, IBF champion at the time.
Legit professional boxer.
But he lasted 2 minutes and 18 seconds against the legend.
Yeah,
before
not bad.
He was submitted to no surprise.
Yeah, I mean, this fight got a lot of attention for the fact that, you know, if you look back, he's wearing one boxing glove. I mean, yeah, again, a total. You know, you could totally see that in his frame of mind, he doesn't really know what he's getting into. What did you go in there bare knuckle? Do you not? Shall I have one boxing glove on? It's like, okay, this is mixed martial art. I'll have a boxing glove on and have one bare hand. And I mean, how crazy to see one boxing glove on the hand. It's kind of comical to see. But respect to Hoist, really. He never disrespected any of his opponents. He never rushed about it. He picked his timing.
Never threw a punch.
No. He and I'm lucky enough to have got him at our gym a couple of years ago now, 3 years ago now maybe, to do a seminar. And the way he constructed a seminar was a completely self-defense orientated aspect of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it was great, super interesting. He basically run us through all the technical aspects of how he fights, and it was the same thing. It's about, sort of like having your head back, your arms out, stamping at the leg to try to get your entry. He did exactly that here. He was attacking the guy's leg, not mixing it too much with the hands, and he shot him for a double leg. Now, not like a wrestler would do. He didn't have his drive and turn phase. He shot in on double legs, stayed down on his knees, and the guy had no aspect of sprawling or how to keep his balance, and he got bowled down very, very quickly, mounted. And I don't think Hoist really had to do anything much. He never really got to even give a bash down. The guy tapped out. I think he felt the control.
He didn't like it, did he?
No,
he didn't. He didn't like that feeling of being controlled completely by the other person.
And if anyone's going to criticise him for tapping out before he received damage, you've got to take yourself back to the first time anyone does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the feeling of helplessness when someone's on top of you. These guys know how to make themselves feel heavy. Now, Hoist ain't the biggest of men. He's a tall guy, 6'1", but he's not the heaviest of guys. But trust me, you can go in against a guy who weighs 65 kilos. Like my assistant coach, Raymond Paul, weighs about 67 kilos. He makes it feel like he's an 18-wheeler truck on top of you. Now, Hoist is a super master of the ground arts. You know full well he's making himself solid. He's going to feel in control, and that in turn is going to make you feel out of depth and out of control. I'm not surprised this guy tapped out. I think he felt that he knew he was in waters that he was not going to get out of, and it was only going to go one way, and it was going to get ugly for him.
I think I'm not sure if it's either UFC 2 or 3, where Hoist fights like a super heavyweight, like a massive guy, like 3 times his size, which I'm looking forward to, reliving that one either next week or the week after. So next up was Ken Shamrock. A lot of people will probably know him from UFC, but also WWE as well, WWF. Yeah. He's a shoot fighter in this, and he is probably, outside of Royce Gracie, the closest thing to a legit UFC fighter at this stage. And he obviously went on over the years to become a decent fighter as well, with submissions and striking. Patrick Smith, he was fighting, who was a Taekwondo expert. Ken Shamrock won via submission, 1 minute 49 via heel hook.
Yeah, and a horrendously dumb one.
It was nice. It was nice to see, though, just to see like some sort of technical submission.
Yeah. I mean, he ended up becoming a pretty good submission artist in the big scheme of things. We wasn't seeing his submissions as good as they ended up developing into. But yeah, he took Patrick Smith. He got a double under. He's got waist control on Patrick Smith, put him down really early. Patrick Smith used a closed guard. Looked like he knew to be dangerous with his elbows in that closed guard. But Ken Shamrock's well versed in preventing that. He always looked like he was going to sit back for this leg lock. I think he knew nearly everybody in there is going to be vulnerable to a leg lock. and he went back for it. But he went back for it in a really unusual way, where he scissored his legs round the waist of Patrick Smith to set up the leg lock, which is a really strange way about going about it, even for old school methods.
Yeah. The other thing as well is the majority of these fighters will never have felt a leg lock, and the the pain and that feeling of, or any submission, like if you get an armbar or something, that feeling of feeling like your arm's going to snap, or your legs, your knees going to come out of that joint. They won't know that. They won't know that feeling. They won't know how far, how much further it can go, or do you know what I mean? Whereas someone who's training in that sort of thing, they know how flexible their arm is, and they know when enough is enough. Like, do you know what I mean? Like if someone put an armbar on you, you'd know when enough is enough for you. Whereas if someone put an armbar on me, I would probably tap quite quickly, because it would feel like it's going to break quite soon. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, normally when someone's getting submitted for the first time, it's going to go one of two ways. One where they don't know when to stop, because particularly in that circumstance where because their adrenaline's running so high and they're not aware of what's happening to them, especially with things like heel hooks. They probably had no idea what was being applied to them. So quite often with heel hooks, they quite often don't hurt until they snap. If you just get a weird sensation in your knee, and then boof, it goes off like a shotgun. It looked like Patrick Smith had no idea what he was involved with there.
But he wasn't going to hang around to find out either. Man.
Yeah, any leg lock specialist. I don't want to criticise Ken Shamrock, because I do see him from time to time. I managed to talk to this guy, and it's actually a really nice guy. Comes across quite cocky and arrogant, but when you actually talk to him, always got time for fans. I managed to be on the same flights as him on a few occasions, and got my picture with him and everything. But really nice man. And same for not. Obviously, I've met Hoist, really nice guy as well. All these guys, I very rarely do meet a rude, horrible character. There have been some, but I won't mention. But very, very rare.
Well, I'm depending on you now, Danny, to get me Royce Gracie and Ken Shamrock for the podcast. Ken Shamrock is one of the. I used to love him. Love him.
Yeah. I was a big fan too. Yeah, because to me he was an all-rounded fighter. But when you look at that heel hook, that's not how you do a heel hook.
No.
And anyone with halfway decent knowledge on how to defend and prevent them would not have been getting submitted with that end setup. But Ken Shamrock was probably new to learning these techniques as well, reasonably so. He certainly. He knew bits about the submission, but not all the finer details, because his legs were totally in the wrong position here for it. Yeah, but it was entertainment nevertheless.
It was very entertaining. Yeah. So next up we have the semi-finals. Semi-finals of UFC 1. The first semi-final was Gerard Gordeau versus Kevin Rosier. Gordeau, the Savate fighter, Rosier, the kickboxing fighter. So we thought this is going to be a striking fest if ever there was going to be one. And Gerard Gordeau won by corner stoppage in 59 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, with all the other fighters that we'd seen, none of them looked that good as strikers. But Gordeau is clearly a skillful Savate fighter. He was, doing the jab and the round kick. He not only attacked the lead leg of Kevin, but attacked the rear leg of Kevin as well. He was just head and shoulder, and he was by far the fresher guy. I mean, he finished the previous fight with a kick and a couple of punches. Poor Kevin Rosier had quite a war on his hands.
He had the longest fight of the whole tournament.
Yeah, he did 4.5 minutes, something like that. And as we knew from the interview that we spoke about, we knew he only had 3 weeks to prepare, so he's absolutely exhausted. He'd given his all already. But again, it was another grounded kick finish, which was the theme of UFC 1. It was another stomp, but this time to the body.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't he have a broken hand as well?
He had trouble with the hand, whether it was broken or not. I know the commentators were talking about it. That it's possibly a broken hand, but he did use it. So I imagine if it was a broken hand, he wouldn't have been using it at all. But he did use it. Possibly he had a wrist injury or something there. Who knows? But he looked good. He looked like a legit good striker
fighter
in there. Yeah, absolutely.
So the next semi-final was the kind of dream match at the time, which was Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock. And this was for people who had knowledge of martial arts. This was kind of the fight which everyone had wanted. But unfortunately, the way the card, when they did the draw for the card, the way it worked out was that they were on the same side of the bracket.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, it was the semi-final and not the final.
And again, it was like I say, if they're drawing in fighters from only 3 weeks out to do this tournament, it goes to show how there was a lack of event organisation there.
Well, I think they were trying. I think the problem was they were trying to find somewhere which would allow it to go on. So my understanding is that the venue had been changed in the months coming up to the event quite a few times before they announced it, because they were struggling to get clearance from the relevant, governing bodies or whatever.
Sure.
That's from what I understand, but I don't know, obviously, for certain.
Yeah.
Royce Gracie won via submission after 57 seconds. Were you surprised at how easily he beat Ken Shamrock? He beat him with a sleeve choke. Bit of a strange finish as well.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Ken Shamrock probably did the best strategy that he could hope for to beat Royce, other than trying to stay on his feet, because he's a superior, bigger man, naturally more athletic than Royce. So he could have used his wrestling maybe to stay on his feet and strike, because I think, Frank's a reasonable striker, certainly a better striker than Royce is. Royce has not really got any background in terms of striking ability, and clearly does not want it striking at all. So you would think maybe Ken would want it on the feet, but I think he wanted to test himself out on the ground a little bit. But to give him hope there, he would have had to try to leg lock him. But again, the way he prepped it up and went about it is just not clever. It was not clinical in its approach at all. And any proficient BJJ guy just has pretty decent control of all his limbs. And he saw this leg lock coming, did the right type of things in terms of spoiling it, in terms that Ken was setting it up so wrong. Got put in a potential mount position. Ken was having none of the mount position, and gave up sort of like a back position, not where the hooks were in. And from that back position, Royce used what he had on as part of his fighter tee, a gi, and so he used the sleeve choke, which was really quite clever and adhering to his martial art. He caught him out with the very uniform that's that his martial art is all about, which is wearing that gi. He caught him out in something that he knew he would not have any idea on how to defend. So he used his gi to choke him. I thought it was very, very clever of Royce. I think had he tried a normal guillotine, had he tried a normal armbar, a normal triangle choke, that could have really dragged the fight out. I think Ken would have had athleticism and some know-how on how to defend those, and it would have dragged out to be a longer fight. But the fact that he went for something which incorporated his gi was a clever move and a righteous move that got that quick finish. Really clever for Royce to do
that. So, General, I wanted to ask you a quick question. Do you think they should have made all the fighters wear the same style of
no. Yeah,
equipment?
No, I don't.
Or do you think it adds to it that they were able to wear their own martial arts?
I think back then it really was martial art versus martial art, and if you're a judo guy, you're all about being able to use your own gi or your opponent's gi. Okay, so you could go up against someone without a gi. It doesn't mean you can't use your own gi, like we saw with Royce. So absolutely, as it was back then. I mean, MMA now is a sport under its own set of skill sets now. So I kind of get it. The organisations limit it. I do think there is room out there for an organisation to still keep it potentially, for a stylist to want to keep his gi uniform on, if it's deemed safe to do so, as long as no one's, it's not going to create danger in any way. For instance, you can't have a stick fighter going in saying, well, I want to have my sticks with me. I kind of get that. But I think, if a judo guy that wants to stay true to his roots and wear a gi because he feels that it's going to give him something that's going to give him an advantage to put it where his style is more suitable, I think they should allow it, to be honest. It's like the wrestling boots. I think, you should be allowed to wear your wrestling boots. Okay, so you're not allowed to kick to the head if you do wear them. But I think they should allow it, but they don't. Maybe there are more complex reasons why and health reasons why they shouldn't. I can't see from a personal perspective on why that would be. But yeah, no, I think, whatever's your uniform, you should wear. It should be your decision to.
Cool. Okay, so the final of our first week of covering the retro UFC tournament, UFC number 1, the final.
Yeah.
Gerard Gordeau versus Royce Gracie. And Royce Gracie submitted Gerard in 1 minute 40 using a rear naked choke. I got to say, I was very happy to see a nice rear naked choke.
Yeah. I think this is like the, this submission rear naked choke is like, it's like the ultimate dominance. It's having the most superior position, which is on the back, and to choke them out. It doesn't matter if you choose not to tap because you'll sleep, basically. I mean, it's full expression of dominance. It really is. And we know Bordeaux's potentially really dangerous. So Royce had to get in, he had to stay in, and he was like a sucker fish. Once he got to him, he just was not letting him go. And he did a really nice little outside leg trip. It was nice, and it took him straight into the mount position. And for that mount position, I think just the threat of what potentially could have happened in terms of damage to his face made Gordeau turn. And you turn your back on a jiu-jitsu guy when you're not a jiu-jitsu guy, it's not going to be long before you're potentially unconscious or tapping out. He chose to tap out, and it was over very, very quickly. He made short work of a very dangerous opponent.
Indeed, he did. He was very dominant, and Royce Gracie was the winner of UFC 1. So next week, myself and Danny will be talking UFC 2, which was a 16-man tournament, which I'm just going to read out, not the names, I'm going to read out some of the martial arts, which were of the 16 men. So you had ninjutsu, which Danny's now going to tell me what that is.
Ninjutsu, well, you all heard of ninjas. So basically, a ninjutsu, I actually trained a little bit of it over my years. I trained with a couple of ninjutsu guys, and they do have some weapons involved with their arts as well. But basically, it's a fairly complete system. So they have their striking, they have a form of takedown, and they have elements of ground aspects too. But yeah, ninjutsu is fairly complete in its coverage of skills. It's just in the modern day, they don't train it in a way to become a proficient fighter in terms of sport. Ninjutsu is more of a training system that you would use for outright war, basically.
Right. Okay.
And to kill an opponent. It's not a sporting martial art by any stretch.
Okay. So what else we got? Karate, obviously we know that. Taekwondo, karate, Wing Chun. What's that?
Yeah, Wing Chun. Well, if everyone knows about Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee started out with Yip Man, who's very proficient in the art of Wing Chun. Again, it's something I've dabbled with. You'll see people use the wooden dummy to condition their forearms. And there's training techniques like sticky hands, where you put wrist to wrist and you feel movements. You can pretty much close your eyes and do it. It's an unusual striking form. Again, you won't see it being used in any combat sport today, really. But it's really interesting research to look it up about it. But Bruce Lee's would have. You would attach the most famous name to it.
IP Man films, isn't it?
Yip Man. Yeah.
So what else we got? Sambo, which I know that one. That's like a Russian martial art like I can't remember what it's based on, but yeah, it comes from Russia, so I know that much.
Yeah. So a pretty realistic training system. You know, they're legit good.
Okay.
Someone's good at Sambo is good.
Now we're going to test you. What is San Soo?
San Soo. Is this
Yeah.
was this the one that Joe San? Is it Joe San who represented that system?
Sorry, let's have a look. No, it was Thaddeus Luster. San Soo.
Okay, no, I don't know.
By the looks of it, the full name is Kung Fu San Soo.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm assuming
no,
it's like
I wasn't
a
aware.
of Kung
I know
Fu,
that Joe San come up with his own, but I think he come along maybe in UFC.
Right, okay.
3 or so. Do you remember that Joe San? He ended up. I think he's in prison now. I think he's in prison for murder or something like that. But he also starred in a film or two. He fought Keith Hackney.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. But you know, as we go through UFCs,
well,
I could cover a little bit more knowledge about him when we get there.
So as we got some Muay Thai. Oh, my page has gone off now. But yeah, there's lots of different martial arts in UFC 2. There's some interesting bouts and fights, which I'm really looking forward to watching and talking to you about, because the one thing. One of the very few good things to come out of this lockdown has been that we got to cover some interesting and some classic fights. So we talked UFC 1 and we talked Frank Bruno and Lennox Lewis, which was really enjoyable. So next week we're going to talk UFC 2, and JD sent in asking us to cover, because I asked people to send in if there was a particular fight that they wanted us to focus on, whether it's boxing or MMA. Then we would cover one fight per week plus the UFC card that we're on for that week. So we're obviously next week we'll do UFC 2, and they've asked us, JD's asked us to cover Kazushi Sakuraba versus Royler Gracie from Pride 8, which if anyone has ever seen any Pride, they are fantastically wild Pride shows.
Yeah.
Just for you guys, if you want to watch these shows, so you can kind of go along with us, you can find the Pride shows on UFC Fight Pass, and obviously UFC 2 is on UFC Fight Pass as well. And yes, that's the show. I have really enjoyed that, Danny. I've got to say.
Yeah, it's a good bit of fun going over old school.
Yeah, and we had a little taster into what like the watch-alongs will be like, because we both put the boxing on, to watch as we were talking about it, and basically that's what those watch-alongs will be like. And if this lockdown does, drag on into a long period, maybe we could do like a watch-along one night in the week. We'll do like we'll pick a UFC card or something and just chuck it on there. And we could always do like a watch along just to, pass some days in. So we talked UFC 1, which was called UFC 1 The Beginning. Next week, UFC 2.
Yeah,
No
and
Way
UFC
Out.
2, it was a videotape. I was with my first girlfriend. We had nothing to do one evening, so we went to Blockbuster Videos. And I remember seeing the video, because I think I covered this in the podcast that we had originally done. But yeah, I picked that as a movie, thinking it was a movie. And it ended up being this UFC 2. And I was thinking, crikey, that looks really real. And of course, as it's playing out, I'm like, what the hell? This is real. I couldn't believe it. I remember showing my dad some of the fights. I'm like, Dad, look at this. And he goes, oh, bloody hell, son. I said, Dad, I want to be a world champion in this. And of course, he does what he normally does when I used to give him any of my ideas. He was like, oh, yeah, all right, Dan. But
you became a world champion.
Yeah, years and years later, I ended up doing it as a professional sport. But a little bit of
featherweight champion of Cage Warriors, yeah. So UFC 2 is some facts. UFC 2 also they extended the tournament to 16 men. It also marked the debut of John McCarthy as a referee. But competitors could only win by submission or knockout, or the towel being thrown in. So that's the same. No weight classes as usual. No rules. Did they remove the groin shots yet? Doesn't look like
they did. No, I don't think they did.
Royce
I remember
Gracie is, Royce Gracie is obviously defending his crown. I'm trying to see if there's any familiar names now. Patrick Smith, Johnny Rhodes, David Levicki. No one massively. Robert Lucarelli. No one that's Scott Baker, Royce Gracie, Minoki, Ichichara. Can't see anyone who would stick out name wise, but obviously, you might be more familiar with a lot of them. But I've got a list of the finishes, and the finishes look a lot of fun. I've got to say, there's KOs, there's guillotine chokes, there's lapel chokes, arm locks, triangle chokes, KO. Oh, that's going to be good. Corner stoppage. Cannot wait. Danny, thank you for joining me again, my friend. That was great fun.
Yeah, my pleasure as always, Si.
And guys, we'll see you next week. You can find me on Twitter at ACEcast_nation. You cannot find Danny on Twitter because he's not on there. You can find me on Instagram at the same at ACEcast_nation. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ACEpodcastnation. That's the best way to support the channel and the podcast. And check out all the various stuff we've got on. At least 3 shows a week. In this lockdown period, it'll probably be more like 4, maybe 5 some of the weeks. Got loads of shows coming up with Robbie Regan. Shows coming out soon. Former world champion boxer. I know I've got some Cage Warriors fighters coming on. A UFC fighter coming back on. Plenty of stuff to keep us going. So, guys, keep an eye on all our shows, and we will see you next week. Cheers, Danny.
Yeah, cheers, Sam, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
Indeed. And spread the words, tell your friends, help us keep growing, and maybe one day you will get the massive prize that was £60,000 for winning UFC 2.
Defending champion, welcome